a lot of trauma is relational with people. A very, very common issue with people with chronic conditions is that they have forgotten how to honor that intuitive sense of things, which is actually part of what perpetuates these conditions. I want to talk about a little bit more about the science. I'm doing my best to make all these things very relatable. And the reason I'm saying that is that my experience is that people that understand this, the basic science, get better quicker and stay better, because part of what is in the way of us getting better are certain constructs that are in the ecosystem of our science and other orientations that is actually incorrect when it comes to trying to solve these things. It doesn't really serve. And that's what we're going to talk about right now. So the title of this session was kind of moving behind the machine model and into relational healing, the approach. And that's what polyvagal theory talks about, is that whether it's between ourselves, our conscious mind and our body, or us and others, there is this reciprocal, ideally at least, rhythm that has to be established, a relationship that promotes healing and wellness. And if that's not present, it's the opposite. It actually creates stress that becomes toxic and makes us sick. What I want to talk about to start with is why the medical model fails so horribly to deal with chronic conditions. So the reason for that is that back about 500 years ago, this is when it really set in. It's probably a little further back than then. There was a shift in how we saw things in the Western model of thinking. And what it did is it started to use a machine metaphor to explain everything. And that's really good for certain things. But the problem is that we aren't machines. We're organic. Humans are organic. And so if you want to understand certain concepts, like anatomy or certain functions of the world, it helps to break it down into a machine metaphor. The problem is that it's just a metaphor and it actually isn't true. It's a tool for understanding, but it's not actually factually true, any more than a map represents the true territory that it's showing. So if you think about that, when you're looking at a map of the U.S., that isn't actually the U.S. It's just a representation of the U.S., fragmented down to help simplify it enough for you to make certain associations. It's no different with medicine. So modern medicine sees the body as a machine that has symptoms that are malfunctions to be fixed like broken parts. Now, the other part of this model that's incorrect is there are no parts. That's a construct. And even though it's a helpful construct, it's good to know that, okay, we say the heart. Well, is the heart really separate from the rest of the body? No, it's not. And even when you dissect the body, how you dissect it depends on your goal, but the way you dissect it will make you see the anatomy completely differently every time you dissect it. So it's not like, basically what they've took is sort of an average agreement on how things should be separate when they dissect, rather than really telling you, which is arbitrary, in other words, largely. So this model is unbelievably helpful for acute injuries. But for chronic conditions, it's an absolute, utter failure. And so if you break your arm, or you need hip replacement, or you have bullet wound, the Western model is absolutely fantastic. But if you're dealing with chronic issues, chronic pain, chronic illness, mental issues, like, severe depression, it's obvious if you take just a look at how the health is trending in the U.S. and other parts of the world, an utter failure. Because you can't focus on isolated parts. What you need to do is to see the body and mind as a cooperative whole that's relational. So this is why I say relational healing. There's a relationship there. And by the very definition of relationship, what you're talking about is a bidirectional communication and usually at optimal, a reciprocal rhythm between things. And that's no different between us and our environment, right? So if you don't have a good rhythm with your environment, you're not going to do very well. And part of that model, basically the doctors are told these things. Don't connect emotionally with your patient. Well, if you look at polyvagal theory, Dr. Porges, he says, in his opinion, up to 50% of why someone gets well in any medical setting is the quality of connection between the practitioner and the person that they're seeing. And the reason that's true is because when we feel connected and safe, it turns on healing mechanisms in our nervous system. I'm going to say a quote from one of my new heroes, Ian McGilchrist. And here's what he says. What you find is determined by how you're looking. So I'm going to explain what that means in terms of what we're talking about here. So when you view the body as a machine, therefore the only solutions being drugs and surgery, you're not addressing the complex sort of dynamic of things like fibromyalgia, autoimmune disease, severe depression, and chronic pain. Because this is actually what's called left brain dominance. So you're only seeing how to things in parts, and you're trying to figure out what part is messed up. But that's not the problem here. The problem is the rhythm of relationship. And if you want to understand how to heal what's ailing you, it's about restoring a certain relationship between systems in yourself and the world. Because organic is a relational, as I said. And here's another, actually even a scientific basis to what I'm saying. Your body is a community, not a machine. It's not like your body is a single autonomous system. It's actually a community of cells, bacteria, so microbiota, and then the nervous system and other systems that actually have to get along to function. And they have to coexist. They have to be governed properly for things to work right. And that's also true in the ecology of our lives. We have to learn how to get along with others, which actually means to co-regulate with others. So we have to be a certain way that makes other people want to be connected to us over time. And that's how humans thrive. And if you're someone that's asynchronous, then you're pretty lonely. You don't actually know how to do that, or maybe you don't care. But healthy people have lots of connections with people that are mutually helpful, right? So that's co-regulation. So therefore, well-being is relational, both to your body, to itself, and to everyone else in nature as well. What we have here is the conscious mind and the body as a team, optimally, right? The body is intuitive, and it should be the leader. And to be more precise, right brain, body, right? That's the part that intuits, that has a sense of the whole, that understands interconnectivity. It has compassion, that can even imagine how someone else might feel. That's empathy, right? Now, the conscious mind is ideally the detailed-oriented helper to the intuitive. So it knows how to plan things, take things apart, and investigate things. But it sucks at overview, and it doesn't have any empathy at all. And it tends to be kind of narcissistic if it's in control, because it thinks it knows, and it doesn't want to be contradicted. So while the intuitive side of us is open-minded and actually wants to be challenged in a way, help me understand things better. When we have the left brain in charge, it actually doesn't, it wants to decide and be in charge and be powerful and be in control, but it doesn't really want to be contradicted. When we're at an optimal kind of balance within ourselves, what happens is that, let me just kind of illustrate it through a little mini story. Let's say you're taking a walk on a nature trail. Let's just say you're in your body. So you're walking on a nature trail, you're aware of things, and then you see something that you don't know. Oh, what's that? Something novel. So what happens when we see a novelty is that the overview brain says to the errand brain, check that out for me. And what you do is you go from this broad focus to this narrow focus, and you examine and maybe even pursue and grasp and say, oh, what is that? And then once it's examined to your satisfaction, then you go back to the overview brain, and it's integrated into the whole. And then it becomes part of your map of how you understand the broader world. And it's this fluid sort of switching back and forth as needed. Now, here comes the caveat. When we are shocked by something, trauma, you can call it overwhelming stress if you like, what happens is it throws off this balance. And what it does is it causes your conscious mind to dominate, and the body gets stuck in survival modes. The way it sequences is that let's just imagine, let's say, an overwhelming situation. Let's say a car accident that you had nothing to do with, so you get rear-ended or something. So when that shock hits, your nervous system actually goes sometimes very quickly through this list of ways to adapt. Should I fight it off? Should I run? Should I freeze and hide? And if none of those work, then it says, I better play dead and that way I might survive. So if in that car accident, this can happen in a split second, by the way, but sometimes this happens in stages. Like if you were being pursued by someone that eventually caught you, you would end up in the same place. It would just happen slower. The nervous system puts you deep into that survival mode of plain dead, which is called shutdown. It's a very low energy state. And essentially what you're feeling in your body is that you're dying, which is very unpleasant. And so the conscious mind can't tolerate it for too long. And to survive, it fragments from the body so that it actually literally cuts the body off. And what that does is it puts you in this orientation of the servant, the errand boy, being in charge, almost like a coup in a government. So you know how in governments they're like, the military has to take over because otherwise we won't survive. This is very similar, actually. So all powers are put to the military, right, or the military leader. It's the same thing in your body. And so what happens is that we have someone in charge that really shouldn't be in charge all the time. But that's what the whole system thinks is necessary for survival. And this is why when the threat goes away, we don't realize it's gone. Not in our nervous system, at least. And we have this look almost like a broken marriage. So, and the marriage is actually a really good metaphor for this, because in an ideal marriage, what you have is the partners really aren't equal. What they are is complementary. And you don't want really equal, because you want complementary abilities that equal each other out and make you more effective overall, right? So that's not any different than our nervous system is the same way. So here we have the conscious mind in control, like a tyrant. And it does become a tyrant. And it's a tyrant that doesn't want to let go of power, mostly because it's afraid of the threat that it still thinks is present. And so you're either going to be hypervigilant or numbed out, or you can switch back and forth between the two. And this is a stuck state. So ideally, what we want is a flow between states as necessary, depending on what we're facing. For example, it's a mistake to think that you want to be calm and vulnerable all the time. That would be a terrible thing, because it means that you would be in the presence of certain threats or certain situations, and being that way is actually it's not functional. You wouldn't want to be this friendly in the same way you are with a loved one to everybody, because you're open in a way that makes you vulnerable. Some people would take advantage. This is another actually pattern of people that have trauma, is they tend not to know how to orient around people so that they keep the dangerous people away and the good people close. It's often reversed. Okay, so you're in this stuck state, even though the original threat no longer exists. And what the consequence of this is what's called nervous system dysregulation. And what that means is that you don't know how to adapt to the environment you're in, because you've got a tyrant in control who isn't very smart about the relationships of things. And the part of you that would be able to sense this is kind of like in the dungeon somewhere. This is what creates chronic stress disorders, PTSD, and so on, because we're not meant to be in that emergency state for too long. We're only meant to be there temporarily until the threat goes, and then we can come back to that balance. And here's what's happening with that divorce, or that fragmented marriage, is that the body actually keeps the score, which is the name of a really good book, by the way. What it's saying two things to the conscious mind. We need to reconnect. You need to let me back into my position. And also, we have a threat we have to figure out. When we are shocked like that and we're put into this state of fragmentation, what is recorded in the body is what I metaphorically call a dragon. So this is a mythological metaphor. So when you face that threat or that situation, you didn't figure it out. You didn't learn how to orient around it properly. And so what happened? You got burned by it. And as long as you have that burn, you're always going to be afraid of it. And it will dysregulate you every time you think of it or go towards it. And what the conscious mind does is it just ignores and suppresses. Because what it doesn't want to do is to revisit that feeling it had originally that made it disconnect. So what it does instead, it'll poo-poo everything that the body wants. And there's all kinds of ways to do that. You can use drugs to numb out. You can work like crazy, 100 hours a week. You can exercise too much. You can be obsessed with Netflix instead of actually being with yourself. There's also some people space out. You even will have this dialogue in you that says, you're doing a terrible job. I don't know why you even try. God, you're stupid and ugly. Wow, you really thought you could pull that off. That's really hilarious. It's, there's all kinds of flavors to this mind, this conscious mind that is ridiculing what the body is asking for. And then you might even blame yourself. God, it's my fault that everyone around me isn't happy. I just must be such a loser. So, okay, what's the solution to that? Well, you have to rebuild the relationship. And what that requires is the conscious mind has to turn back towards the body and allow it to at least consider talking to it at first. It's the first step, and acknowledging it, and then eventually stepping back and letting it take its proper place. To do this, it takes practices and certain therapies to restore that proper dynamic. Let me talk a little bit more about the dragon metaphor, because this is really important. That your life map, it consists of areas that have been conquered and understood, dragons, which are things that overwhelmed you that you still haven't figured out, and then unknown territory. If you want to be calm and regulated, you have to deal with the dragons. And your symptoms of distress, the pain in your body, your depression, all those things you may experience, is your body creating a symptom to get your attention and to try to motivate you towards reconnecting the mind and body properly, and then together as a team, conquering the dragons that have burned you and that are still bothering you in your subconscious. Sometimes you don't really explicitly know that, but if you actually settle down enough, you're like, yeah, I just, every time I try to ask for a raise, I freeze up. Or, if I try to get my needs met with my partner or my spouse or whoever, or my family, I find myself shutting down and being depressed. It's different for everyone, right? But you're going to see that there's these dragons that aren't conquered. And the reason why I promote these practices so much is because the practices help do a number of things. One, they encourage the proper order of things, which is the body should be an intuitive leader. They help build resilience in the body as well. And we're going to talk about that a little more. And the reason why you have to do these practices is because if you face the dragon unprepared again, it's going to burn you again. And the chance of you going back one more time is not very high. So it's almost like you have to train to face the dragon. The training involves reconnecting the body and mind properly, and also actually literally fortifying yourself through exercise, diet, all these things matter, enough sleep, so that when you face the dragon, you have a chance of actually winning this time. And the dragon always has gold. The gold is wisdom, resilience, and the ability to navigate better in life. That's the gold. And then when you have that, you actually give it to, you get to bring it back to the world. The people that you love, the world in general will benefit the more regulated you are. And that's actually something that Dr. Porges, the polyvagal theory scientist, said. He goes, the best gift you can give your loved ones and the world is you being more regulated on your own steam, basically. Because it means that you add more rather than take more from situations. Now, this takes time. And this is why I just harp on about practices, because it's my belief with no doubt in my mind that dedicated to a daily practice of wellness, and I don't really care what you put in there to start, whatever appeals to you. For some people, it could be prayer, it could be meditation, it could be breath work, it could be cold exposure. I've done all of those, plus many more. And I've discovered that the more tools I have in my toolbox, the more flexible I can be about using what tool is best for a certain chapter of my life or a circumstance that's coming up. You don't want to do too much at first because you can overwhelm yourself, and that's going to be counterproductive. So here's some kind of just an outline of practices that you can consider. So some practices are for listening, stillness, right? That would be journaling, meditation, prayer, or something like walking in nature where the goal is to be quiet. And you'd be amazed when you do that, what sort of things will arise. Pieces of wisdom, certain nudging you a certain direction. But you have to make space for it. The other is the body awareness, the body scan. Some people, especially for young people, roughhousing is a really great way to get in your body. Any sort of play, even board games and stuff, not always body aware, but it can be because it's very settling. Dancing, breath work, all those are great. Yoga, Pilates, especially if they're very slow. So remember, the body needs more time to process than the mind. So the more we can slow down with awareness, the mind aware of the body, the better. And then resilience training, that could be, again, breath work for that. Certain kinds that exercise the vagal system very vigorously. Cold exposure, heat exposure, cleaning up Your diet is also super helpful for that. And again, mindful yoga and things like that will also help with resilience. The ultimate goal of what we're doing is narrative rewriting. So you want to rewrite your story. And literally, when we have experiences in our lives, what happens is that when they're processed properly, which actually means that we're not overwhelmed too much, our mind turns every experience into part of our story, our narrative. And when you have a narrative that is upsetting, dysregulating, you want to rewrite that. And there are different ways to do that. All the things I mentioned so far can be that. There's also things like acting in the theater can help some people. There's a type of therapy called family constellation therapy, which is essentially being in a therapeutic setting where you have other people there to help you rewrite your relationship dynamics from the past. And then there's certain writing exercises that I've mentioned before, like Jordan Peterson's self-authoring suite, which I have done finally the whole thing. It took me a number of years to do it all. And in that writing exercise, you actually literally write out your life, write out your strengths and your weaknesses, and then write what you want to create, which I think is super helpful. And I do believe a combination of body awareness stuff and things like writing you want both. I don't think just writing is enough. I think you have to also do body awareness stuff, and possibly, like I said, if you're into theater, that can help. True healing is not a one-time insight, right? That's a myth. It's not going to have this huge revelation, everything shifts and you're good. It's not how it works. And part of what I've learned too that's fascinating is that positive emotion is generated not by what you would think. It's generated by movement towards a valued goal. So if you perceive yourself moving towards something valuable, something meaningful, that's what actually generates positive emotion. It's not someone telling you you're wonderful. That's okay, but that's not actually what does it. It's you, by your own conscience, moving towards something better. And the higher you aim, the better, because the goal is not to arrive. The goal is to continue to go up that spiral of better. And again, I'm going to kind of reiterate, what I think is most important is that you dedicate yourself to a practice of betterment. I actually don't think it matters that much what you start with, is that you do start, and that it's sincere. So that's what I think is most important. And then if you start and you commit, it will develop on its own to some degree. Like, in a sense, it has a life of its own, and it will start to communicate with you almost like, it's another entity. It's not for the faint of heart. I mean, this is a journey that not everyone's willing to go on, and for good reason, because it's really confronting and hard at first. But I do believe that when we slay the dragons, the treasure we bring back is more than worth it. It's just that we have to trust that if we face the dragon, if we actually reconnect with ourselves and then face the dragon, then it's going to be worth the discomfort. I gave an honest answer. That's the most important first step. Where am I? I'm stuck. Okay, great. Well, that's now you know where you are on the map. You're on the, you're stuck. Okay, that instead of saying, is what we tend to do is, oh, I'm fine, or I'm fine. It's like, well, you're not fine, but it doesn't mean you're wrong to be where you are either. Being truly fine means that you're witnessing where you are. So imagine you're your best friend. If you said to your best friend, I feel stuck. Oh, go on, snap out of it. You idiot. Do something else. That's not what your friend would say. So that's, again, we want to try to be with ourselves in a loving way, which in itself can be very difficult, by the way. But that is how we heal, is we have to encourage those two to interact, and then we have to hear what they're requesting. The body mostly is what's doing that. It's saying, hey, I need some help with this. I don't know how to get through this. All right. So thank you, everyone, for today. If you found this content helpful, please like and subscribe. You can look forward to more videos about how to overcome chronic illness and chronic pain.